This is my interpretation of the Pursuit class light cruiser. This unique looking Imperial starship debuted in the 18th issue of the Marvel Star Wars comics from 1978. This is a very early work of Star Wars media, which makes this ship, designed by artist Carmine Infantino, one of the very first expanded universe Imperial starships ever designed. It's obviously based on the general vibe of a Star Destroyer, but it has a really unique and groovy retro sci-fi identity that I find very compelling. So I just knew I had to bring this ship into a realistic live-action sort of format. This ship looks different in virtually every panel that it appears, so it was a bit difficult to nail down the shapes and details. Ultimately, the best I could do was figure out a design that resembled every version of the ship simultaneously. So the best approach wasn't so much to exactly match the details in any one panel, but to lean into the concept of having lots of angles and corners and deep crevices, which is an approach that somewhat simulated that feeling of the ship looking different from every angle. Furthermore, I made sure to design my version of the ship with a complicated yet technically rational alignment scheme that I hope creates the overall effect of a confused yet concrete design. The ship isn't quite as monolithic and imposing as a proper Star Destroyer, but I'd say the design has a sort of unhinged danger about it. While most of my work was spent interpreting and balancing the details from the source material, I did deviate from the design intentionally in a few places. For instance, to provide ample space for a hangar, which, while not impossible, was pretty infeasible given the thickness or thinness of the original design, I added a structure to the bottom of the ship to give just enough space for a believably functional hangar. But I figured the ceiling might still be a bit too low clearance to accommodate the landing and launching of basically anything larger than a TIE fighter, so I added a dorsal aperture inspired by the Venator class as an alternative way to get ships in and out of the hangar. So with that, I ended up with a pretty fleshed out and functional Imperial vessel. Now, this is a ship that has some recognition in the original expanded universe lore. That's where we get the name Pursuit class, as well as its overall length of around 500 meters and its capacity to hold 2 squadrons of TIE fighters. But I think we can take all that and go way further to give this ship a proper backstory. So, of course, I came up with a little something myself. With the Empire expanding more rapidly than its shipyards could keep pace, the Imperial Navy began considering vessels that had the necessary presence to hold territory without necessarily needing to hold the line in battle. The Pursuit class was the perfect solution. These ships were inspired by Kuwati regional defense cruisers that predated the Clone Wars, but would be specifically redesigned for the Empire to look as large and imposing as possible with a minimal investment of resources. This resulted in a wafer-thin 475-meter starship with only a bit more firepower than ships half its size. It was just big enough to trigger an inkling of the psychological impact of a Star Destroyer while still being a relatively inexpensive vessel. To the poorly equipped populations of the marginal worlds that typically encountered it, the Pursuit class might have been confused with more powerful starships, but those who knew better saw it as a relatively manageable target. Whenever it participated in any large fleet formations, the Pursuit class was generally seen as a weak point, but this was, of course, known to none better than the crews of these starships, who became known for somewhat unpredictable and surprisingly ingenious tactics to make up for the deficiencies of their vessels. After all, these ships were fast for their size, and they could carry multiple support craft and at least an entire squadron of TIE fighters during standard operations, giving the Pursuit class a surprising versatility despite its relative fragility. Furthermore, as the Pursuit class was designed specifically to patrol territory that outpaced the establishment of major Imperial shipyards, these ships were small and light enough to be built and serviced at civilian shipyards. This feature allowed sector commanders of far-flung regions to more easily and more directly commandeer existing facilities in their territories without the costly process of building out dedicated Imperial bases. In fact, some commanders even preferred this sort of governance, even when other options were available to them, by transforming existing hubs of commerce and travel into Imperial bases, and by conscripting the local workforce to maintain them. A relatively small occupation force could exert stable, persistent control over an entire planet. Once a population depended on the Empire for its livelihood, the impulse to rebel tended to vanish. In this way, the Pursuit class acquired an unexpected authority. Though it was, in purely technical terms, an underpowered vessel, it came to represent a particularly efficient and maverick style of Imperial rule that resulted in a disproportionately inherently powerful projection of control. There was a kind of aspirational quality to the Pursuit class. It became the hallmark of sector governors who were sharp enough to turn marginal assignments into their own miniature empires carved out at the edge of the galaxy. There's something really special about these strange old comic designs where they just beg to be reimagined. So I'd love to tackle more ships like the Pursuit class if you guys would like to see it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.